welcome Hela to that session. The title was on with regard to Tunisia and that of the Arab Spring, whether it's an end of it or not. Hela is an author of the book which is written on the issues of the trade unions and Arab Revolution and the case from the UGTT. If we could do it this way, Hela, I'm sure you probably have seen this, but usually we allow something like 20 minutes for the first speech that you could actually address everybody, and then afterwards we would have questions and comments, if that's okay with you.
Yes, thank you, Aman.
Sure, that's okay. Whenever you're ready, please start.
Okay, so can I start?
Sure.
Yes.
Please
okay.
do.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your invitation. So I must confess that my English is not that fluent. So I asked Roger to send me some questions. So I will try to answer these questions. First, I will start by talking about maybe the role of the trade union UGTT in the initial uprising, and then I will also talk about how the role of UGTT and also other various social movements evolved during these last 10 years. And then I will conclude by the current political situation and the challenges ahead, Qais Said and the head of the Tunisian social movements and the Tunisian people in more general terms. So for the UGTT, so it's important to keep in mind that when the Western media start to talk about the Tunisian revolution, the historical causes and the consequences of the revolt were immediately abandoned in favor of a depoliticized narrative of a spontaneous movement of young bloggers rescuing their country from a dictator. This narrative essentially denied the importance of the history of activism and different social struggles that the West supported dictatorship, at best marginalized and at worst criminalized. So we need to keep in mind that various networks and organizations, such as the Tunisian League for Human Rights, the Lawyers Association, and the Union of Unemployed Graduates, conducted collective mobilizations. The labor movement, as embedded by the UGTT is the Tunisian General Labour Union, was a key player and contributed greatly to the revolutionary process. Historically, this organization has been a site of conversion for militant trade unionism and the struggle against autocratic regime in Tunisia. UGTT has played a vital role in various popular revolts, starting by opposing different neoliberal reforms in the 70s and in the 80s. And they also supported the popular revolt that has been crucial to what is now termed the Revolution of Dignity in Tunisia. It has been involved in this revolution since the initial uprisings in Sidi Bouzid on December 17th and organized rallies, marches, and general strikes in various regions. So I need also to explain that UGTT is totally different. I mean, the way it's structured and the culture of UGTT is quite different from the classic trade union that defend only their sectorial interest. With almost 1 million members, the UGTT is the largest trade union in Tunisia and for many years was the only union. The UGTT is mainly present in the public sector. It comprises 24 regional unions, 19 sector federation, and 21 general unions. A number of different political movements are present in the UGTT. It's not really totally leftist. Some media or some analysts used to portray UGTT as a leftist bastion. It's not true. The leftists are very present. So the UGTT, of course, the leftist groups are very are present, have a strong presence within the UGTT, but we find also representation of the Islamists and also the former ruling regime. So what we need to keep in mind that a number of different political movements and affiliation are present in the UGTT, which has members from all regions of the country and so different social backgrounds, including manual workers, civil servants, and also doctors. The union was founded in 1946 by Farhat Hashed and other Tunisian unionists, following a split with the French General Confederation of Labour, CGT, and when the French Communist Party and the French section of Workers' International refused to support the independence of Tunisia. So UGTT was the cornerstone of the independence movement during the colonial era. The UGTT has always played a vital role in Tunisian politics. So throughout its history, as I said before, we can found UGTT defending political demands and also social and economic demands. Another important feature of the UGTT, it's unlike its counterparts in other Arab countries, the UGTT has always enjoyed a certain amount of independence during the autocratic regime of Ben Ali and Bourguiba. So after Tunisia gained independence in 1956, two factions coexist within the union. The first, known as the union bureaucracy, submitted to the will of the regime, while the second resisted to the ruling power and gained the upper, and during times of crisis managed to maintain control over certain region and certain federation. So that's why many social movements in Tunisia have been able to secure the support of UGTT despite the union bureaucracy close ties with the government. As a result, the UGTT during the revolutionary process was able to play a decisive role. The UGTT was gave mainly organizational support to the spontaneous movement of the jobless and the undergraduate unemployed with diploma. They were at the center of coordination between different national organizations and different parties. UGTT has offices everywhere in the country, so it helps to it helps the geographical spread of the uprising, and we can see that we have two phases in the mobilization of the UGTT. The first phase is the middle classes and the working class was supporting the marginalized, and it led to the departure of Ben Ali. And then we had a second phase, which is totally different from the first one. And the first phase, we have witnessed a change in the strategy of UGTT, and they made a consensus with the the economic and political governing elite. So what I can say that it's important to know that UGTT is not a classic trade union. It's not the partisan consideration that would condition or structure the political positioning of the UGTT, but rather than a very subtle balance between different sectorial interests, different regional consideration, and different also political considerations. So the Tunisian unionists would say that UGTT it's balancing or a countervailing power. So it's a balancing power in Tunisia, and its political position depend on the subtle balance or on the struggle between different political and economic forces in Tunisia. Now, the important second phase is the post-Ben Ali era. UGTT was the main architect of national dialogue. For those who didn't hear about the national dialogue, in Tunisia, after Ben Ali, we have witnessed different political crises. And they culminate with the assassination of the two radical leftist leader, Shukri Belaid and Brahmi. And after this political crisis, there was a huge debate in Tunisia, and the opposition wanted to overthrow the Troika. The Troika was the first elected government, and it's a coalition between the Islamist Party and two other leftist parties. And the National Dialogue won the Nobel Prize, and the UGTT was the main architect of the National Dialogue. They managed to allay political tensions through a negotiated agreement. And this agreement was a power-sharing arrangement between the former governing elite and the newly elected elite, mainly the Islamist Party. This national dialogue, while it secured the political stability of the country, it widened the gap between two rival visions of democracy in Tunisia. The idea that the representativeness of political parties and elections from the core of democracy, basically the liberal democracy, and the belief, the second vision, the belief that there can be no viable democracy if social and economic demands are not a central priority in the political alternatives. So the UGTT, which accepted to join forces with human rights, the League, Human Rights League, the Lawyers Association, and UTICA, which is the Employers Association. This consensus between the middle class as represented in the UGTT and the economic elite as represented by UTICA, which is the Employers Association, was seen and perceived by the revolutionary movement as a class consensus that was built on at the expense of the social and economic demands of the revolution. So, because of this switch in the strategy of UGTT, the union of the UGTT is finding more difficult to maintain its place as a very important political organization in the political landscape in Tunisia. And now, what we can say about the UGTT, instead of the traditional divide within the UGTT during the dictatorship between the base, which sought independence from the Ben Ali regime, and the union bureaucracy, which was more or less subjugated by the single party state, today the division within the UGTT is a new split between those who want the UGTT to play a key role to resist to the different new waves of liberal economic reforms imposed by international donors and also by the local economic and political elite, and those who think that UGTT should leave space to the political parties because we are in the era of democratic pluralism, and to play only the classic role of any trade union, which is to secure the interest of its members. So even though since 2011, the political role of UGTT has taken priority over its social mission, the trade union is still torn between, as I said, it's a faction that is willing to negotiate liberal reforms with political and economic elite in exchange of a few salary increases, and another more radical wing pushing the organization to act on national social issues such as unemployment, the fight against the privatization of public services. That's it. Now, what we can say about the post-Ben Ali era, two important things in order to understand what's going on now. I think that what we can say in a very general and briefly about the political transformation in Tunisia, that the only political demands of the revolution has found an arena within which to manifest themselves. So we have free elections, we have political pluralism, but all this was done at the peril of both its economic and the social and economic demands of the revolution. So the old elite, as represented by Nidé Tunis in the past, and today by Abir Moussi, and new political and economic elite as represented by the Islamist Party, both also within the government and within the opposition, found themselves allied in a struggle to neutralize the revolutionary process. And to some extent, they managed to give different coup to the revolutionary process. But the revolutionary process is still alive, and what happened recently could confirm this hypothesis. So in doing so, what happened that the political and economic elite, the new one and the old one, managed to carry out the same economic and political model, and they managed to establish a hierarchy of struggles between the political struggle for political freedom and the other struggle, the social and economic struggle. So this schism, or this division between political demands and social and economic demands, has been largely internalized by the governing elite and set the motion through the magical word of democratic transition. So if we want to understand what's going on in Tunisia today, if we see it through the lens of democratic transition, of the liberal model of democracy, we can say, yes, this path is in danger. If we want to see it through the lens of the revolutionary process, here things could be more complicated. So, what was the political character of the recently deposed government of recently deposed government of 25 July 2005? I want to start by saying that there is a fairly broad consensus in Tunisia on the origins of this political crisis. First, social and economic demands of the revolution are not satisfied. Disaffection of distrust expressed by citizens toward their representatives within the parliament, considered as corrupt, and more broadly of the political class as a whole. Interference of economic and political powers in the electoral process. Decline, a very important decline of partisan militancy. The weakening of intermediary bodies such as UGTT and other structure, and the disintegration of the state institutions through mainly the crisis or the political competition between the old regime and the Nahda, the Islamist party, within the state institutions. So from this point of view, if the Tunisian context only confirms the crisis of liberal democracy that we are witnessing everywhere around the world. So it's not something specific to the Tunisian context, but within the Tunisian society, we can, or more broadly within the media, we can find three readings of what happened. The first reading of this recent coup, I would say coup, there was a debate whether it's a constitutional coup or coup d'etat, or it's the continuation of the revolutionary process. I'm not going to enter into these details because it's not important for me, and I think that it's important to see the competition between mainly three readings. The first reading is taking up the most obsolete Orientalist representations. And we saw this in the American and the English and mainly the Western coverage of the political situation in Tunisia. They see the Tunisian people as a uniform, inert, and homogeneous mass, largely manipulated by a charismatic leader at worst, and at best by regional and Western powers. The second reading, faithful to the dictate of the democratic transition recipe, assimilates democracy and representation. It makes the representative system the expression of the will of a people, of the Tunisian people, who are supposed to exist by themselves, pretending, and this reading is forgotten, that the version of the people represented in the parliament is also the product of the rules of the functioning of the political regime and the political and the electoral code set up in Tunisia. This analysis sticks to a strict respect for the constitution, supposed to be the guarantor of the democracy, in our case, a corrupt democracy, and totally illegitimate if we think about the different social movements in Tunisia. And they would interpret the current situation in Tunisia as a coup. The third reading is defended by what I will call the extra-parliamentary social movement, which brought Qais Said to power. So I should remind you that Qais Said was elected by a percentage of more than 80%. And Qais Said is an outsider in the sense that he has no political party behind him. He has no political economic power behind him. He's really an outsider from the political scene. And this extra-parliamentary social movement who brought Qais Said to power used the slogan of the revolution, the people want the fall of the regime. And this extra-parliamentary movement is questioning actually the boundaries of politics, understood here as institutions defined by the constitutions or the legal text around the collective management of the city. And this reading, the desire for community embodied by the will of people, can only be conflicting and in direct opposition to classic political institutions, including the parliament, largely dominated by the Islamist Nahda party. And here I would like to draw your attention to the fact that at the center of the conflict between this extra-parliamentary movement who brought Qais Said to power and the governing elite, and more broadly the political elite, is not so much the relationship to political Islam, but the main issue with Nahda is not its political Islamist identity. The main issue with Nahda is its normalization with the former members of the former regime, their entertainment or their maintaining of an economic system based on a rentier logic, and the way they totally fragilize the state institutions by accepting all the liberal reforms imposed by IMF and other international donors, and mainly the project of decentralization that managed to weaken the state institutions. Some analysts and some media are portraying, are describing what's going on in Tunisia as the first coup to the democratic legitimacy. I would like also to remind you that it's not the first time in Tunisia that the borders of democratic legitimacy were redefined. Faced, as I said, with different political crises, the national dialogue was perceived also by some revolutionary forces as not legitimate. And if we take the democratic legitimacy standards, the democratic legitimacy or these political institutions were also highly challenged by different social movement. And what I wanted to say that the frontier or the borders of politics in the sense of how to govern a society were regularly redefined in Tunisia. And there was a lot of openings and a lot of experiments of trying to redefine the frontiers of politics, mainly also by social struggles, which without necessarily seeking to subvert the pre-established modes of democratic institutions, create a lot of new autonomous political spaces. And this is very important. During these 10 years, we have different social movements outside the UGTT managed to create autonomy, political autonomous spaces, making it possible to set up a social mutual assistance network to manage, for example, the pandemic crisis in the face of the failure of the state. We have a lot of social movements against international companies, mainly in the natural resources sector, that promote the appropriation of territories and spaces that were largely confiscated by the single party state and by the former ruling regime. So all these experiences of redefining at a regular basis the frontiers of the democratic legitimacy invite us to shift our focus and analyze the current political movement in Tunisia, not only through the prism of constitution or electoral and government political activities, but also to take into consideration the actors on the border of institutional politics. It's important to take into account their politics, their speeches, their practices, and their representations, which tend to renew the borders of the political space and the way to exert politics in Tunisia. But the question is, these various fissures in French, or this various opening within this political space, are they sufficient to bring down the political and economic regime that ruled Tunisia for more than 50 years? The answer is obviously no. History shows us that institutions cannot die of their illness or dysfunction. They are not human beings, and unfortunately, they cannot die of their dysfunctions. And the extra-parliamentary movements or social movement in Tunisia struggle to create really real alternative political spaces. The Tunisian experience of the last 10 years shows that the ruling regime has an unexpected capacity for resilience, and the governing political and economic elite find a way always to cope with the anomalies and also the monsters it creates. So the popular recourse to the Qais Said, who represent in the eyes of many Tunisians a leader, a moral leader, or the good authority, aimed first at the rehabilitation of the moral order and to make the revolutionary demands heard at the same time. Qais Said for me is not the problem. Qais Said for me is the symptom of the incapacity of the existing classic political parties and the classic national organization, with including the UGTT, to take in hand or to confront the ruling class. And while we should not neglect the role of emotion and affects in the process of identification of a large part of people with the figure of Qais Said, or the charismatic, he is not charismatic. He is more representing the moral order and someone who is outside the corrupt elite. So the question is, Qais Said will have is facing high expectations, and the question is, Qais Said, will he manage to satisfy the high expectations by Tunisian, and what kind of negotiation and what kind of alliance will he will have with the economic and political system. In this regard, it's important to recall that Tunisia was never ruled by a single man. It has historically been in the grip of a police party state supported by economic powers. In the absence of this configuration of a strong party state ensuring the redistribution of a minimum of wealth, and in the absence of an economic and political power behind Qais Said, the great unknown concern is the nature of the alliance that Qais Said will negotiate with those who hold economic power on one hand, and those who continue to the police, basically the Minister of Interior, who it's the police state, it's the police regime. So some Western media talk about the role of the army. The army is not playing any role in Tunisia. It's more the Ministry of Interior, le Ministère de l'Intérieur in French, who is the most important organization, and he's holding a lot of power in Tunisia. So how to solve this crisis? Changing institutions or people. Here, I mean, changing constitution, because there is Qais Said, or the supporters of Qais Said are calling him to change the constitution and to announce the Third Republic. Here, opinions also differ on the right way to put an end to this exceptional institutional phase. Some voices fear the authoritarian restoration and propose the organization of early elections. Mainly Nahda is one of them. The idea is to elect a new parliament and to appoint a new government. Other voices consider that it's the current political regime that is the source of all the dysfunctions, and we need to have the Third Republic. But I think that the various political crises experienced in Tunisia show that the stakes of an institutional change cannot be reduced only to a problem of individuals on power, or to the nature of the political challenges, mainly institutional, which society is confronted with. I think it's important to move from a technical approach, the liberal approach of democracy, and the implementation of appropriate institutional changes, towards a cultural approach that integrates the local expectation of what a good government should be, and on which depends the legitimacy of the institutions and their appropriation by local population. So I think, in a word, it's important to move from a binary opposition between a fetishism of a disembedded democratic principle on one hand, and the fear of a collective unconscious, Tunisian unconscious, that would be in essence authoritarian. I think it's very interesting, and to focus, as I said before, on the daily creation of autonomous space for political action, And I think it's difficult today to anticipate the political future in Tunisia. It would be interesting, as I said, to look at this collective political imagination, which has somehow managed to keep the horizon of political possibilities open, to create within the dominant ruling regime, within the dominant structuring borders of politics as played today, gaps, places of possible fissures, possible opening that could prepare the future or the political landscape to come. The last question is, what was the UGTT reaction to all of that? The UGTT, with more than 1 million members today, is representing still a very important power in Tunisia. UGTT did not reject side decisions, but rather emphasized on the need to return to the constitutional legitimacy in any action taken in the future. In their statement published on their official page following a board meeting on Monday, the union stressed the need to ensure respect for constitution, the continuation of the democratic path, and the restoration of stability to the country, and the restoration of its capacity for construction and progress. So it did not clearly declare its opposition or support for the president move, unlike the leftist political party that declare that what happened is a clear political coup d'etat. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Hela, for a very informative talk about the current situation, the backgrounds to it, especially since Ben Ali's scenario and the position of my side at the moment, and the position that the union has taken. If I could open up the session by asking if anybody wanted to first ask questions or make any comments. I believe Joseph will probably come in at some stage to make his contribution as well. But meanwhile, would anybody have any specific questions or comments to make? Yes, Ken, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the talk. You mentioned early on that the institutions in Tunisia, however corrupt and dysfunctional, still lived on. Is it likely that those same institutions will somehow regroup and continue even under the new political leadership? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think, yes, as you said, the political, the ruling regime. When I say ruling regime, I mean the ruling regime in the broader sense, political and economic regime. I think from the beginning, they managed to, they show a very big capacity of resilience. So they managed to make a consensus with the new elected the Islamist party. They managed to somehow confiscate the social and economic demands of the revolution. And I think now they, through the new transformation that a lot of Tunisians see as it was welcomed by different factions of Tunisian people. I think the same ruling regime would find ways to reorganize itself in order to maintain its grip on the economic interests. So the risk here, what we are witnessing here, the debate is mainly whether it's a coup or not, whether it's going to be an autocratic regime or democratic regime. And to me, the question is not whether it's going to be labeled dictatorship or a democratic regime, because we had a democratic regime, but it was an oligarchy in Tunisia, and were totally corrupt, and they were in a way a clan of autocrat in the power in Tunisia, and they are responsible of this political crisis. So the question is not whether it's going to be a democratic regime in the liberal sense or an autocratic regime. The question is how the ruling regime would restructure itself to fit this new political phase. Qais Said, he is lonely. He doesn't have any power behind him, so he will be forced to make some alliances, and he has already made some alliances with the police and the army, and also some regional powers. The question whether or not he is going to make larger concessions to the political and economic elite, or to what extent he's going to be able to have this balance between the high expectations of Tunisian population and the demands and the pressure of the governing elites. Nobody could tell us how things would evolve, but the thing I'm sure that what are we witnessing now for 10 years, that the revolution process as represented by different social movements continue to be alive and continue to try to neutralize any drifts. This is can maintain hope in the democratic path, but not in the liberal sense, in the democratic path, in the sense of establishing an alternative democratic model that satisfies the economic and social demands of the revolution, along with, of course, political freedom.
Thank you, Hela. Thomas, you have raised your hand, and then there is David.
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank Hela for a very informative presentation, and the presentation of the serious dilemmas that are facing any revolutionary in such situations. The Arab Spring has been one of the most important events in of the 21st century. It's probably the biggest revolutionary upset we had up to now. And starting from Tunisia, it spread to virtually every Arab country. Nevertheless, although this spread so widely, there wasn't any serious call for Arab unity or for a common cause of these movements. And this is not by accident. The masses at this stage, what they are asking is, they start from social demands, but what they are trying to see is that it's what's happening in the West, achieve the democratic and the social condition of the West without being able to implement them in each country. Because we have seen time and again how this develops. Strange forces like the political Islam or Muslim Brotherhood take over, but the old regime comes back. Coalitions between all sorts of old and new forces take place, but in the end, there is no real change, and there will not be any real change until there is change in the West. As long as the great powers, the great capitalist powers, are stable and they can call the shots in the international arena, there is no hope for this revolution. Sooner or later, they will fall back, and we have seen this again and again. So we should really speak about revolutionary action in all these countries only in terms of world revolution. And this is not something that happens today. Lenin was speaking in his time about this. We have seen it coming right through this period. And this is where everything, we are going wrong everywhere. We are trying to find solutions in each country by itself. That cannot be done. We have seen it in Greece. I mean, in Greece, the ruling classes were routed. There was nothing left. It was the European elite that retained the force and the ability to crush the Greek people. And of course, the inability of Syriza to mount a revolutionary politics in the sense of world revolution. So what happens? Are we going to deny the possibility of a revolution in these countries? No. A revolution can start anywhere, but it can only finish with a revolution in the West, in the main capitalist countries. And unless we have this general viewpoint, we cannot get anywhere. So I think that we should see in the Arab Spring this dimension as well. That unless we understand what's happening all over the world, we cannot really solve each country's problems within their own borders.
Thank you, Thomas. David, it's your turn, please.
Okay, again, thanks very much, Hela. It's been very illuminating. And we don't often discuss the role of trade unions as quite as pivotal as in the Tunisian situation, because it does seem that the unions, as you've explained, have had a really important role in pulling together, if we could say, the traditional working class sector with new social movements, which is a very unusual development. In South Africa, for instance, they're still poles apart, even quite antagonistic. And that allows the regime to continue more or less, as before. But the question I want to pose is, what are the demands actually coming from the UGTT, I understand, the trade unions, for a democratic change, not a transition from one regime to another, but, for workers to come to power. Well, let me put it more in a transitional way. The point that has been made about Tunisia is that, the success in achieving some democratic victories in Tunisia have been dependent on the trade unions calling general strikes and its history, its marvelous history of being independent from, Bourguiba and the previous regimes, and actually being instrumental in getting changes, taking place at that time, which is highly uncharacteristic of both Arab states and also of African states. The trade unions have usually either been, very oppositional small groups, or they've been, completely controlled by the regime. And we haven't seen, we've seen attempts in Zimbabwe to do, to bring this change, which have been really crushed by Mugabe, who actually deliberately deindustrialized Zimbabwe to make sure that the unions had no base at all. And now they are, in a very weak position. But to get back to the question, it seems that when you explained it, you said that we're looking to some extent at the balance between economic demands, which have been put forward by the UGTT to some extent, and the regime has been partly responsible in the past to that, it seems, to be able to give wage concessions, but not political concessions. On the other hand, what is during the Arab Spring, the attempt to democratize, what were we wanting? What was the workers' struggle? I'm arguing that the struggle is not so much, to get elections, although we welcome that. As Rogers often explained, we would rather have a choice between who we want to see in power, who we can effectively defeat. It's not that we're going to have an electoral revolution, but at least we change the balance of power so that we are in a better position to struggle. But what has happened and what we are lacking to some extent, to respond to Themos's points, is that the workers want control over the state. And what we've seen is, from the Arab Spring, is shifts within the state and democracy in the sense of elections and a new regime coming to power. It's then turned out, as you've explained, to be completely corrupt, actually even worse in a sense than some of the previous regime, because it brings in new partners into the corruption. And then a complete stasis and a paralysis of society, and incapable of responding to COVID and to other crises points. So what program is UGTT putting forward to get control over the state? In South Africa, we have a catastrophe. We've lost trillions of dollars because the state officials, especially in the state sector, state-owned enterprises, have just spent the money on themselves, on their cars and all the rest, and have made bad decisions, one after the other, which have left the economy in a sense of paralysis. The state sector is in a complete disgrace in South Africa because it's just losses after losses, which we have to pay tax for. And we have absolutely no control over what decisions are being made in relation to electricity, to ports, to railways and so forth. And the trade union position, which is just bargaining for higher wages, is completely meaningless in one sense, because we have no control over what's happening. Those whole state sectors will be collapsing and people forced to be made redundant because we've not intervened at the level of control over the state to know what investment decisions are being made, because these people are utter looters. These people have absolutely no qualifications. And I imagine it's the same in Tunisia, where you find people who are just cronies, friends of political groups, coming into power to make massive decisions and relate to the state sector, which are actually not based at any kind of rationality. So, I'm speaking in a sense for the history of being in the leadership of a small, well, actually it was a significant trade union in the garment sector. And we found that we were unable to make much progress on the economic front, because if we doubled the wages of the workers, that just meant that the garments would become unsaleable in South Africa. They'd be too expensive, and that there'd be crash after crash. So in a sense, then the union focused on getting other concessions like health concessions, social benefits, education for children, and things like that, rather than fighting all out on the economic front. On the other hand, on the political front, there was paralysis. There was nothing happening on the political front, which would have levered up the aspirations of the works to see change under apartheid, to be able to see effective resistance to apartheid, to seeing the securing of houses, of real substantial benefits, because the attitude from the trade unions, I know it must also be echoed in Tunisia, is let's just concentrate on the wages alone. And that actually is, a situation which is in a way quite reactionary, because it's not expanding the social benefits which workers must achieve from the state, and also the critical question of control over the state. Now what seems is that we're going into a period of Bonapartism, in which elements of the state are acting against other elements in the state. And that we have to have a program of how to stop this. We have to know how we can get control over these shifts, above us, so that whatever comes is going to be more beneficial to us. And then finally, more than just more beneficial, that we actually can come to power in some way or other, have a strategy, to get to power. And that's the question I posed in the beginning, and I suppose that's the question I'll leave with you. See if you could answer that, to know just how we have a transitional program, what demands are we putting forward, which are not just, I think I've just had a look on the internet to see that the UGTT statement is talking about normalizing politics or something like that, that we don't just ask, for some sort of vague change at the top, that we need a substantial demand about control over the state. I think it's a very dangerous situation where we find a Bonapartism developing with a foot in the police and in the army and in regions, which could be a very reactionary outcome. So we have two an unpalatable, two impossible situations. We've got either utter corruption with bourgeois democracy, or forms of that. On the other hand, we've got extreme danger with Bonapartism, which is coming now in the present position with the president finding support in the army. And we've got, this begs, what is the unions responding in this crisis? Not just to ask for, as I see, EU is asking for normalization of politics. Well, of course, but on the other hand, how do workers actually have an elbow or a face, a fist in the face of reaction, so that we can actually, stabilize the situation for workers and extend workers' power in Tunisia? Thanks.
Thank you, David. Hela, before you answer, where I had a comment as well, or would you like to wait and after that come back, or would you rather actually answer now? Shall I go and then you answer the whole lot, or would I make it easier?
I think it's easier for me to answer quickly the two first questions, and then
okay.
Sure. Thank you. So thank you very much for these important comments, questions. So for the first question, so I agree with you partly. Of course, I mean, there is a fundamental idea here. I mean, Tunisia was, during under the era of Ben Ali, Tunisia was described as the example of economic success. Then, after the fall of the regime, Tunisia becomes the example of democratic transition success. This way of making Tunisia as an example in the Arab region was really problematic for the Tunisian people and for the whole region, because no viable democracy is possible in Tunisia without ending the war in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and this is a very important aspect. I mean, there was a very clear engineering of separating Tunisia from the region and from the Arab region. And I totally agree with you on that idea that no viable alternative, no viable and legitimate regime change without ending the wars in the region. What happens after the Arab uprising? We have the counter-revolutionary movement everywhere, in Tunisia and in Syria, in Lebanon, in Libya, has taken two forms. The first form is the local form. I mean, the former regime trying to maintain its interests. But this former regime, this former ruling elite was for decades supported by the Western powers. And of course, what happened that the counter-revolutionary forces are represented by this neo-colonial pact between the former ruling regime and the Western and regional also powers. Now, what I wanted also to say that the intervention of the Western powers within the Arab region has taken two forms. The first form was classic bombing. We are witnessing there are wars everywhere in the region. And the second form was a new wave of economic liberalization. And in Tunisia, the IMF, the World Bank was at the key players in weakening the state institution. I mean, and the last conflict with IMF was led by the UGTT, and because the IMF wanted to privatize the remaining of the public service in Tunisia. And the slogan of the Tunisian revolution is freedom, national dignity, and work. And they use the the slogan national dignity to talk about national sovereignty. So what happened, as you said, that Western powers have a clear role in the counter revolution within Tunisia. Now, the question whether we should wait for the West to help us, or to where we should change the Western powers, to wait for the change in the Western powers to be able to have an alternative democratic change. I'm not sure. I agree with you on the fact they still have a very strong power, but I have hope, and I am confident that the hope could come from the southern part of Mediterranean, because unfortunately the different political experimentations, like what we have witnessed also in Argentina, are not covered by the analysts and experts who focus only on institutional politics. There are interesting experiments, of course still small, but very interesting trials or experimentation to build another way of considering the democratic principle, and also the equality needed to make a viable alternative regime change. So I'm not naive. It will take decades in order to install another regime, but I'm not sure that we need to think about what's going on in the Arab region in terms of priority. I think we need to think about what's going on, or about social movements in the region as a whole. What I mean by as a whole, that we should need to consider the counter-revolutionary forces, but also the way people are resisting underground. And for me, and to me, the coup of Qais Said, and the way and the popular support of Qais Said, also, it's a way of saying that we want, all the international community was happy with the corrupt parliamentary system, but the Tunisian people said, no, we are not okay with that, and we managed to re-question and to interrogate and to redefine the borders of this fake democratic institutions. So your question is very complicated, but I think, yes, I think, I mean, the Western powers are big players, but I think there is, at some point, we will have an alchemy between the internal dynamics within the Arab countries, and also the way local populations are resisting in the Europe to their autocratic regime. If I take the example of France, it's clearly for me an autocratic regime now, but this is another debate. So the parallel between Greece and Tunisia is very interesting, because the common denominator between Greece, Argentina, or Tunisia, that or Chile also, in a way, that we were witnessing extra-parliamentary movements, but they are suffering from organizational challenges. So here, one of the key points in terms, okay, the classic, a lot of activists have declared the end of the classic political parties. Some of them are celebrating the horizontal networks. So I'm not a fan of horizontal networks either, because in Tunisia, we have also witnessed the limit of horizontal networks. So here the big issue is what kind of alternative organizational forms these new social movements could take in order to be efficient and effective in challenging the ruling regime everywhere. And here I think this is the common question everywhere. And what happened with Podemos, what happened in Greece, and what we are witnessing in Tunisia. I mean, if I take the example of Qais Said, the extra-parliamentary movement that supported Qais Said wasn't able of creating a political party, and they don't want to create political party, which is a problem because Qais Said at some point will be forced to negotiate with the police and the Ministry of Interior. Now, the second question, there is a specificity in Tunisia. So we cannot talk about UGTT as an organization of workers in the classic sense, because as I said before, we can find different social categories. We can find doctors, we can find workers, and we can find a lot of public, mainly public servants within the UGTT. Again, UGTT has never been leftist in the classic sense. It's totally different from the CGT Française, which was communist and affiliated to the Communist Party. So this history makes it difficult to expect from UGTT to build a specific power of workers to take over the state. The UGTT in the 60s, some unionists tried to transform UGTT with like what happened in other countries, in like what happened in Brazil, for example, to transform the UGTT in a political party, the Party of Workers, and they failed in doing that because you do have a lot of different political affiliation. There is no homogeneity in terms of political affiliation within the UGTT. So the sociology of UGTT is very critical to understand why UGTT has not or didn't want or couldn't have the project of taking the power over the state. Now, of course, UGTT has played a very important role during the Ben Ali and Bourguiba regime, and the political in the political landscape in Tunisia. We have three organizations. We have the single state party, and we have the UGTT. But UGTT has always operated as I said, a countervailing power that tried to neutralize the drifts, only the drifts. And this is what happened during the revolutionary process. They were forced, the bureaucracy was forced by the grassroots unions to support the spontaneous movement, led mainly, and this is very important to keep in mind, by the jobless and the unemployed. So the most important social group in Tunisia now, it's not the workers, it's the jobless. And the question now, I think, how the jobless could organize themselves within also an clear, effective organization. We had in Tunisia different also experimentation of the jobless and the unemployed trying to build effective organization. I think it's maybe the only country where the jobless were organized in an association called the l'Association des diplômés chômeurs, unemployed with a diploma, but they didn't manage to sustain their organization in the long term. So your question if whether or not the UGTT have a program, they don't have any program. Their only concern now is to protect the remaining of civil service, and as I said before, the increase in wages. But I should also mention again the intervention of European Union within the UGTT and the intervention of the counter-revolutionary forces. It's very interesting to know that right after the departure of Ben Ali, the European Union led a very big project of restructuring the UGTT. What happened And here I need to mention that the strength of GTT stems from the regional sections, because there is a very subtle alliances between social ties, sectorial ties, and regional ties. And these social ties were very critical and established within different regions, were very critical to resist to the single state party or the former regime. What the European Union did is to restructure the UGTT in a way that UGTT function only on the basis of sectors. So they have managed to influence the internal organization of the GTT, and it's really very important aspect because we neglect the internal organization of GTT from an organization historically based on a very subtle balance between, as I said, social ties, community-based ties, and also sector-based ties and political affiliation, to a purely alliance or network of sectors, and each sector is now defending its interests. This is another counter-revolutionary coup to the EGTT. The other counter-revolutionary coup to the EGTT was led by the Islamist party, because they invest a lot the grassroots unions, and they managed to weaken the leftist, the left wing within the GTT, or the radical left wing within the GTT. The third dimension is left. UGTT was strong because also there was no space for political freedom. So the leftists were basically exerting power or trying to push toward another agenda by using the structure of GTT. With democratic transition or within the post Ben Ali era, the leftists were able of organizing themselves within the political parties, and also this is a factor that undermines the strength of UGTT. And then I should finish with a very important point, that UGTT was also challenged by the new arrival of international NGOs, like USAID, many Human Rights Watch, a lot of NGOs that have a clear political agenda, focusing on civic rights at the expense of economic and social demands. And it was also a big challenge. And also these NGOs are paying activism. I mean, they also push towards the professional activism. And this is also has weakened the UGTT and has weakened also the political L party. So the reaction of the West was massive in Tunisia, not through war, but through NGOs, through weakening different important national organizations in Tunisia. But of course, the responsibility also is local. It's not only external. Now, what's important to keep in mind that there are other types of social movements that manage, for example, to resist to the ruling regime by, as I said, by protecting some lands in the south of, by a collective management of lands in the south of Tunisia. And this is very important.
Sorry, Hela, could you wrap, because otherwise there wouldn't be any time for anybody to contribute.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Do finish your sentence.
I'm done. Sorry, I'm done.
It's just that I'm trying to make sure that everybody gets a chance to actually do contribute, and then you would obviously have a time to sum up. I've just got my hand up. If anybody else also would like to raise a comment or a point, please do let me know. I think from what you had said, the recognition of the fact that there are social and different changes across Tunisia is important. I think it was a new opening when Tunisia went through the Arab Spring and effectively showed a lead from the point of view of the ability of the masses in general to be able to bring down a government. I think that was the most crucial lesson that was actually learned, and that was what was the spread. The thing that did also happen, or the fact that we could have uprisings and revolutions is one thing. The question which actually came up after was what would be the alternative? And I think that is the big question. And that is the question of every revolution, whether it's for the change of a government or anything else. The whole idea is what should be replacing it. I think this was the bit which is what we are saying, not only in Tunisia, but we saw similarly in Egypt, we saw similarly in Iran 20, 40 years ago. Similarly, the question is, to what extent is the working class able to form its own alternatives and its own positions as the alternative for what is currently as the status quo? I think there is no doubt. It's not a case of showing evidence. I think it's absolutely taken for granted that obviously the capital, whether it is in the form of EU, whether it's in the form of US, whether it is the form of the regional powers, they will do their best to keep whatever the government is on and to stop the working class. So in every country, they've done it by one way or the other. The interesting thing, which I think you mentioned, was about Tunisia, is that the role of the Islamist parties is different from the role of the Islamist parties that we had in Egypt. It was different from the role of the Islamist party that we had in Iran so many years before that, or it's different from the role of the Islamist party that we have Taliban in Afghanistan as the other, or the role of the Islamist parties even in Iraq, or Hezbollah in Lebanon, a variety of these. I think that's absolutely correct. The Islamist parties are part of the whole establishment. I think what I seem to understand from what I've read and from what you said, or what everybody I think has seen, is over these 10 years or so, what we have noticed is that all of these have been able to somehow restrict the workers from getting their own alternatives. The new springs of workers' alternatives are coming up. We see across the region. We saw it in the Octoberists in Iraq. We see it in the form of communities in Lebanon. We're seeing part of it in Tunisia. And I think to some extent we saw it in Latin America. The question is this, that all of the other alternatives, other than the classic alternatives, have shown their inabilities. Social networking, horizontal groups, community groups in general, all of them have shown that they don't actually, unless they have the class character, they are open to change from the above. And I think that's the experience that Tunisia has actually faced as well. Unless those are there, I think Greece actually got exactly the same scenario. Unless the class character of the working class is there, it would be very, very effectively impossible. And never mind what happens in the West or East or anywhere else, it would be impossible for the workers to actually get their own into one thing. I think second point that you mentioned, which I thought was interesting, is the assumption, which I think sometimes is taken because of the UGTT. I think to a large extent, we could simulate, maybe it's not a good analogy, but to give a picture, UGTT is very much like the TUC UK. Is a mixture of everything, partially in power, brokering left, right, and center. UGTT is very similar. Assuming that UGTT is the workers' alternative, I think it doesn't actually identify the position that UGTT has. To a large extent, so far as if you are working in one place in Tunisia, and I think similarly to some other so-called workers' organizations across the whole region, the union to you is no difference in terms of defender. In power brokering, sometimes every organization has to show some teeth, and sometimes some of the members of UGTT have done so. But as a workers' organization, it is not seen as one. I think insofar as many workers in Tunisia is concerned, there are unions where workers try, but to a large extent, there's huge amounts of interconnection and hand in the power as part of the work of the UGTT. And that is one issue. And that's why in Tunisia, still the question is what alternatives, what organizations, what agendas. If the unions themselves were the agenda, there was no question. It would be just working through them. I think that the real question has arisen simply because they are not. And therefore the question is, what is the alternative? And I think one point that you mentioned, which is true also in, I think also in Argentina, was a possibility of transformation within the structure, maybe changing the union to somehow to be different. And I think that that has proven, at least elsewhere, to not provide as much of an answer as one would expect to make real change. And I think that is still a question. So if you did have a chance in your sum up, if you could mention to what extent have you seen the progress of building alternatives within the working class as their own organizations? In some countries, we have it as, if you like, gathering of workers and carrying off further than what the union does. The experience of us in Iran has shown that the associations of unemployed don't get you very far, because typically the unemployed are there in order to produce a segregation in the ranks of the working class. And generally better ability to unite the working class is in providing the unity between the workers as employed and workers as unemployed. That experience to us showed to be a lot more making a headway rather than actually having separate organizations, because they wouldn't have very much teeth. And that is the experience we've had. I don't know, maybe the experience in Tunisia has been different. Let me stop here. Hela, before you sum up, Roger has also a point to make. Roger, please go ahead.
Well, I thought, first of all, thanks to Hela, I thought it was a really fascinating account and really taught me a lot about the situation. And I just really want to ask very briefly, maybe Hela could answer, and if, I don't know if Joseph is also in a position to perhaps come in on this, but I wanted to talk about the regional implications. Obviously, the revolution in Tunisia, which started at the end of 2010, set off a chain reaction throughout the Arab world, with revolutions throughout the whole region. And in fact, you know, it was always celebrated, at least in the bourgeois press, up until last month, that Tunisia was the one model example of stability and peace and progress and all the rest of it. And of course, the reality is that, as Hela has explained, actually under the surface, there was huge contradictions and huge tensions building up, which led to the complete collapse of the government, which it turns out was completely lacking in any popularity or mass support because of the level of corruption and so on. But nevertheless, you know, Tunisia maintained some stability. The regime remained in power for more than a decade. And during that period, we had terrible, bloody defeats in Egypt, in Bahrain, in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen, and so on. Nevertheless, I think we can say that, you know, what the popular press call the Arab Spring wasn't just a brief seasonal event. It actually, nevertheless, the contradictions are still there. And we do see that still in the recent period, of course, well, a couple of years ago, we saw mass revolutions and uprisings in Sudan, in Algeria. And more recently, we've seen huge movements in Iraq, in Lebanon, and though not part of the Arab world, but of course in Iran, where we see this massive strike of the oil workers. So really, my only question is, what effects do you think the latest events in Tunisia will have? Will they cause a certain disorientation or even despair among the masses in other countries? Or, you know, what would be the effect of the coup? And in particular, among the Tunisian trade unionists and the left, what international links do you have? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Okay, thank you very much for your question and your comment. I think I cannot anticipate how the future would evolve, but I can answer your question about the influence of this coup among at least from what I heard from my Arab friends and experts who wrote on Tunisia. I think there is a clear divide. I will talk about the Arab left. There is a clear divide within the Arab left, and I'm talking under the control of Joseph, between those and mainly Egyptians, for example, the leftist Egyptians, who said this is a coup d'etat, and it's over for you, our Tunisian friends, and it's and they are of course very concerned with the political this political coup. Another group of the leftists who also knows the situation in Tunisia, and this divide, we can find the same divide within the Tunisian leftist group. For example, the leaders such as Hama Hamami, who I don't know if you know Hama Hamami. Hama Hamami is the historical leader of the party, of the Workers' Party in Tunisia. For him, it's a political coup. So all the leftist classic political parties, they said it's a political coup, and the democracy is under danger, and they talk like the Nahda party, the Islamist party, and they are fearing the restoration of an authoritarian regime. But the new social movement, I talked a lot about new social movement, new different groups who were who were carrying different political mobilization at different fronts. They are actually supporting Qais Said, and this is very important to look at it. And even within the Workers' Party in Tunisia, there is a huge crisis between the leadership of the Workers' Party saying that it's a political coup, and the others saying that well done, we are going to support Qais Said because the old political landscape could not continue because we were suffering and it was horrible. So this is, for me, it's very important to distinguish, for me, Hamal Hamami and the old leftist leadership. In a way, they have the same culture as the Islamists, as the former ruling regime. And what we have witnessed in Tunisia, it's a clear divide between a new generation that is trying to renew their mode of mobilization and their mode of action, and the old regime, the old guard that continue to negotiate and to make national dialogues with the ruling regime. So this is also very important to keep in mind. So again, we cannot talk about a homogeneous reaction to the coup. There is a clear divide within the left in Tunisia about the meaning to give to the coup, and we find the same divide within the Arab left. And maybe Joseph could elaborate more on that. My last comment is about a comment about the workers and the UGTT and the incapacity of UGTT to elaborate an alternative. Maybe we think also, I mean, I agree with you that it's more effective to have the jobless and the workers within the same organization. But unfortunately, in Tunisia, this project has failed, and the failure of the workers to organize a clear alternative could not be disconnected from the whole failure of the classic political parties to oppose the clan on power. That's why this, what I call the extra parliamentary movement, which is an extra political parties movement, is interesting to follow, because it's I mean, I don't know, I cannot anticipate the result of this extra parliamentary movement, but when you hear people saying Qais Said is someone that we can trust because he has no political party, it should push us to think outside the classic political categories, without being naive on the limits of movements without a clear leadership or clear organization.
Thank you, Hela. Joseph, would you like to come in as well?
Thank you, Aman, and sorry, comrades, it's been on and off, but it's been a bit difficult on Sunday afternoon with the kids. Hela, and thank you for your presentation. I listened to everything, was really great, to your comments, etc. Hela, just could you give me back what you wanted me to elaborate more on? Also, you said at one point.
Yes, I wanted to, yeah, Roger asked me about the influence of the coup on the Arab region, and how Arab population, if I understand you well, they have reacted to this coup. And I said that there was a clear divide within the leftists in Tunisia. I mean, the leadership has said, a lot of comrades, and they said that it's a coup and it's dangerous for the democracy. And other groups said that they have welcomed what they call the popular coup of Qais, and the expectations from Qais Said are very high. And I said, I see the same thing within, if I take Safir Arabi or other newspapers or other comrades who commented on the Tunisian situation, mainly the Egyptians, they're also divided on the meaning to give to the Qais Said coup.
Thanks, Hela. No, what I think is, first of all, I think you most know is the level of the left and the radical left. Most of the countries in the Middle East and North Africa is quite weak, and definitely for Egyptian comrades, it's a copy-paste. Okay, it's a copy-paste of what happened in Egypt in 2013. I think this is a mistake because it doesn't take into consideration the difference of nature of the state, the capacities also of Tunis to counterbalance to some extent. And I think here the role of the UGTT is very important, even though it's not clear what they're going to do, but they said they are waiting for a couple of what kind of program Qais Said wants to do. But I think there are main differences. In the rest of the Arabic left, comments have been very small most often. I haven't seen any kind of statements, very clear. It's mostly about individuals discussing. I don't know if you would agree with me, Hela, but I didn't see any kind of statements, even from the Egyptian comrades.
The revolutionary comrades were very clear. They made the statement saying that
yeah, except the revolutionary socialist. But as I said, I think the comparison is wrong. But I think I read the interview of Hammami. I think he's right to speak about a political coup. But moreover, and this is maybe a discussion to have, the real problem, and we talked about it, is that first of all, Qais Said and the old kind of the ruling parties for nearly the last decade with the Islamic Fundamentalist Party and Nahda, with others, or with NIDA, or when it was the Troika at the beginning, Kais Saied is not suggesting any kind of political alternative.
Yes.
Quite on the opposite, I think. Very often I see very much a lot of things in common between Harakat Nahda and Kais Saied. Kais Saied, very more into a moral perspective, has opposed on various, or at least rhetorically, but not, some issues of human rights. When it comes to workers' rights or to neoliberal policies, he's not opposed. And austerity measures, he's okay with it. And I think it's not about defending, obviously, the liberal democracy. And where I agree with you also is saying that basically, if he was able to do this, it's because of the all the policies, basically, and it's not mistakes, it's policies of Harakat Nahda, NIDA Tunis, it's their policies. And basically, it's also true, speaking with a couple of comrades from Tunis, saying that a lot of slogans in the streets for I think it was 25th of July, I'm not sure the date now, was against NIDA, against Nahda. Some are saying we want social justice, dégagisme de all of you dégage, but there's a lack also of political orientation. And I think this is also something to say. By political orientation, I'm meaning by a political party playing a role within these kind of movements. If there was a strong left, the ideal thing would have been to do like a section of them organizing among these protests. And this was unfortunately not really possible, I think, of what I understood. So I think it's not, again, not about defending liberal democracy and what has been going on for the past 10 years, but it's defending democratic rights. And Kais Saied is, on this aspect, putting a bracket, or I mean, is endangering some democratic rights, at least as I see. But again, I think the counterweight in Tunisia is much more important than in Tunis, and so there are major differences. But to say I think it's a strengthening authoritarianism, definitely. That it comes at a time of deep social crisis, after the deep political crisis, etc. But the lack of capacities to propose an alternative is a great danger, I feel, especially from the left, that completely is divided, is unable to suggest something, to intervene in the various social movements with a clear political orientation. So this, I think, is on my side what I believe to be the biggest dangers. And for me, what Kais Saied did is a political danger. It endangers some democratic rights without giving any kind of, leftist alternative. So we are indeed in a form of, I think it has been said by comrades before, in a form of Napoleon face, and right-wing strengthening again, unfortunately. So it's nothing positive to take into account, but Hela explained this well. Yeah. It's very contradictory, and really, for me, the weakness of any possible political intervention of the left is very problematic in this period.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you again, Hela. Thank you, Joseph. And thank you for everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.